So this pretty weird situation just happened where United States pulled a stunt in the Strait of Hormuz, and let's get into that. This is right in the middle of negotiations.
Iran now says U.S. destroyer has turned back from the Strait of Hormuz following a firm
So right in the middle of negotiation, U.S. destroyer just charges into the Strait of Hormuz, then gets around here and turns back. We'll see how that's being spun in a moment.
warning from Iran. And few minutes later, we received this picture, a Navy destroyer.
Yeah, from outside the straits, this Navy destroyer got this deep in.
U.S. destroyer, Navy destroyer U.S. Marshall Murphy is crossing the Strait of Hormuz today, according to ACE data. So this is a very important picture because this picture shows us the approximate position of the U.S. destroyer Michael Murphy. That's during the day. So according to this picture, Michael Murphy was discovered and his position was located right exactly at this point. And of course, the most important question we can ask ourselves right now, how exactly this destroyer got there. There are several options. The first one is that the destroyer came to the Strait of Hormuz from the area of Bahrain.
No, from the Iranian report, it was approaching from the outside. So that is
so using, let's say, these roads, okay? But this is the first option. The second option is that this destroyer entered the territory of the Persian Gulf from the east, from the area of the Gulf of Oman, crossing the Strait of Hormuz, entering the...
That's apparently what happened.
Eastern part of the Persian Gulf, and when this destroyer got to this point, a destroyer moved back. So which means that basically today the president of the United States of America wasn't lying when he was saying that the US began clearing the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe it was more clearing knots out.
It wasn't really clearing. That destroyer just went in, charged to as far as it could, then turned back. It didn't do any clearing. Lucky it didn't hit a mine.
Lots of mines or something like this. It was media clearing to show that to show tankers and vessels of different companies of different countries of the world that they can freely use the Strait of Hormuz.
Maybe it's because he had reports that Iran didn't in fact mine, or at least didn't mine this section of the straits, and he was trying to prove that. Whatever the case, I'll get into my opinion of all this in a bit.
Without any danger and without being afraid of any attacks from the Iranian side. So once again, the U.S. ship got to this point, and most likely the U.S. destroyer then returned back. So if we got, let's assume that this is Michael Murphy destroyer. First of all, he answered this point, the Strait of Hormuz. He crossed the Gulf of Oman. He crossed the Strait of Hormuz. He answered the eastern part of the Persian Gulf, and then a destroyer returned back, which means that the United States of America managed to do this. And this is a very important signal and a very important message. And the most important thing from this message is the question whether the Iranians are bluffing or not.
Basically, this was a publicity stunt by Trump to try to show the Strait of Hormuz are open, to reassure the oil markets, probably. That's how desperate he is. Because honestly speaking, the only reason this happened, that this destroyer is not sunk in the middle of this of the Straits of Hormuz, is because the negotiations were ongoing, and the Iranians gave the ship a 30-minute warning to turn back. It probably gave that warning when it was here, and it used that 30 minutes, and then it turned back. And so the Iranians were not attacking this destroyer because of the negotiations. If this stunt had been tried like 3 days ago, this ship would be at the bottom of the water here. And it's just, it also shows a little bit of a, no, not a little bit, a lot of bad faith towards the negotiations from Donald Trump. And these negotiations were already off to a very rocky start, given how far the positions were on both sides. Adding this to it, it's just ridiculous. Let's get into it a little bit more.
All right, what's going on, everyone? So it is a big day in the U.S.-Iran war, with elements from both countries meeting in Pakistan right now, trying to hash out some sort of negotiated settlement. Meanwhile, we just got a report that the first U.S. Navy warship pushed their way through the Strait of Hormuz without coordination or permission from the IRGC. This was a show of force, a freedom of navigation maneuver, the first since the war began about, 5-6 weeks ago. at this point. And looking at this, Iran,
Yes, the first from he's portraying it like a big victory for the United States. But this happens during a ceasefire, during negotiations, where under any other circumstance, Iran would have actually been salivating to sink this ship, would have sent hundreds of missiles at it and sent it to the bottom of the water. What Trump is trying to do, portray this as a military victory. It's just like that time where off India's coast, they sunk an Iranian warship that was coming back from naval exercises with a torpedo from a submarine. And they portrayed that as huge victory, despite the fact that the ship they sunk didn't have any weaponry. It was a ceremonial ship. So it was all its weapons had been removed to go take part in these military exercises. So yeah, very impressive to sink a ship that had no weapons. This is the same thing. Very impressive to charge into the Strait of Hormuz under the cover of a ceasefire. That shows such bravery, doesn't it?
Iran is saying that's not at all what happened. Iran, for their part, says they actually threatened the U.S. and the vessel turned back around and got out of there. But this and one other item that we're going to get into today kind of gives us an idea of who might have the upper hand as these negotiations continue. Just a few moments ago, we got a report from Barack Ravid of Axios where he says several U.S. Navy ships crossed the Strait of Hormuz on Saturday. They say the move was not coordinated with Iran. It's the first time this has happened since the beginning of the war. Let's pull up a map of the...
Okay, right here, first slide. One destroyer charged in. You can't take it seriously, the idea that the United States would charge in with several U.S. Navy ships. You haven't noticed, Strait of Hormuz is a dead end. There's no way out. Why would the United States want to trap ships in the Persian Gulf inside Strait of Hormuz? So it doesn't want to do that. So why would it send several ships in? And why do this during ceasefire? One destroyer went in, got warned by Iran, and turned around. And the only reason it didn't get shot down is because of the ceasefire.
The Strait of Hormuz to give you an idea of how significant this is in a lot of ways. Again, Iran up here to the north. We've got the Persian Gulf, this body of water.
It's significant in that it's a dangerous stunt in the middle of negotiations because Trump wants a mini PR victory.
Sticking up to the northwest, the Strait of Hormuz is this narrow stretch here. So this is the, very easily contested by Iran that sits around the entirety of the north, east, and west of this strait. So to try to quote Sal from what's going on with shipping, I want to say the lane is around 21 miles wide that ships can move through, very easily covered by Iranian drones.
Yeah, if they wanted to, they could have sunk this destroyer. They just didn't shoot at it because of the ceasefire.
Oh, this has been right now drones. Also, maybe mines. There was a report that Iran put some mines out here and doesn't know where they are. That seems like a minor issue. We'll get to that. Either way, the report from Ravid, they said the U.S. officials said the warships crossed the Strait of Hormuz from east to west. So on your screen here, from right to left, to the Arabian Sea, and then made their way back through the strait into the Gulf. This is not...
From the Iranian side, this warship comes in. They give them 30 minutes to turn around. U.S. goes 30 minutes, and the last possible second turns around and leaves. Just a dangerous game of chicken that serves no purpose but to undermine negotiations.
Operation based on freedom of navigation through international waters. So taking Ravid at his word here, we had a U.S. vessel, I want to say it was the Michael Murphy, moved through the Arabian Sea to the Gulf of Oman. At this point, very close to Iranian anti-ship missiles, right? So they're moving within range.
I guess something they would never have done if the ceasefire wasn't in effect. It's just first time U.S. warship heads into the Strait of Hormuz since the Iranian conflict, and it's during a ceasefire, of course.
Of Iranian strike capabilities. And a lot of U.S. Navy vessels, since the war began, have moved back. So just moving
farther away
Iran is significant at this point.
I would agree, it would be significant if there wasn't a ceasefire. Things are a lot less dangerous during a ceasefire where both sides are trying not to shoot each other. You can have this ship, he'll explain, but the negotiators were told about this, and negotiators told the United States to go back, and if it wasn't a ceasefire, there would have been no telling the negotiators. The next step would be just to shoot missiles at the U.S. destroyer.
But then pushing through the strait, and according to a couple different analysts right now, it looks like they made it a little ways through, maybe near Dubai, turned back around, and then exited the area. So freedom of navigation showing this can be done. A couple key notes here.
it proves nothing, because right now there was a ceasefire, and so the U.S. destroyer was able to pull off this stupid stunt, really. If it's a tanker that sees this, say, oh, the straits are open, and then stupidly tries to go here, that tanker's going to get sunk.
There's no indication that this was a minesweeping operation. We haven't seen that. It looks like just the one ship.
U.S. retired its last minesweeping boat just a few months before this Iran war. Very good timing, right?
There's also no indication at this point that it was an escort operation, that they were going in, picking up U.S.
Oh no, that both the tanker being escorted and the U.S. warship would have been sunk if the story had gone in here and tried to escort something out. No.
Or allied tankers, and kind of helping move them out of the Gulf. So very limited information on this one right now. We do have a couple screenshots of people that are tracking this stuff on publicly available information that appears to show that at least at one point within the last couple hours, the Michael Murphy was in the Persian Gulf, which is significant. Again, the first freedom of navigation maneuver by the U.S. Navy through the Strait of Hormuz since the war began. Now, this came alongside President Trump issuing a statement just a few moments ago saying that we have begun clearance operations in the strait. Quote, well, he went a lot of different directions, if we're being honest. I'm going to kind of dial it down a little bit, but still try to give you the gist. He says the fake news media has lost total credibility, not that they had any to begin with, because of their massive Trump derangement syndrome.
Thing is, media has lied about Trump so much that Trump now feels emboldened to lie himself, because no one trusts the media to call it out.
They love saying that Iran is winning when in fact everyone knows that they are losing, and losing big. He did go on to drop his second praise be to Allah, second in a week actually. So that seems to be a thing we're doing now.
I don't like that. Why are you praising Allah, Trump? Why, as the U.S. president? Even if it's a joke or whatever, I don't like it.
He said, we're now starting the process of clearing out the Strait of Hormuz as a favor to countries all over the world, including China, Japan, South Korea, France, Germany, and many others. Incredibly, they don't have the courage or the will to do this work themselves. So, little bit out of nowhere. Again, ceasefire talks are ongoing right now, and depending on how you look at this, there are some ways you could view this as an aggressive move. There's
100%. Trump has desperately pleaded for this ceasefire and these negotiations, and then he pulls a stunt like this.
There's also the argument that this is an international waterway, and the United States is simply doing what the United States and any other country around the world.
That shows that what he really cares about is opening the Straits of Hormuz. Israel not stopping its war in Lebanon, and so Iran hasn't opened the Strait of Hormuz, so he's really not happy about that.
Should be doing, ensuring that waterway is staying open. You know, the fact that this is happening as the ceasefire kicks off is no doubt a little bit risky. In fact, the Iranian response to this was they said, hey, the United States was on the verge of having these talks fall apart because of this aggressive military maneuver. The Iranian Fars news agency claimed the destroyer, which they say was heading from the port of Furjaya towards the strait, was forced to turn around at the Strait of Hormuz after a warning from Iran. They say Iran, through Pakistani intermediaries, warned that if the ship continued its journey, it would be subjected to fire within 30 minutes, which would also harm the ongoing negotiations between the United States and Iran. A representative of the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that a potential violation of the ceasefire was prevented thanks to immediate diplomatic and military actions. Now, this gives us a little bit of an idea of who is going into these talks.
And there's no way this happened without Trump being involved in something this brazen.
Feeling like they have the upper hand. And when you get into these wartime negotiations, there's a couple things you have to consider. One is who genuinely has the upper hand, like
Iran.
Who has the leverage to force something, to force a certain concession or an in-state out of the talks. But also important, maybe not as important, but it's pretty close up there, is who thinks they have the upper hand. And that's a dangerous area we get into in war, because a country might think they have more leverage at their disposal, and they don't, and they continue fighting.
That's the United States. And the only small, tiny piece of leverage Trump has is that he can bomb the hell out of Iran. Iran destroys everything in the Middle East. There's no oil coming from this region for years. U.S. Global economy tanks. Have a Great Depression with inflation. His life is fantastic everywhere. No, I'm sarcastic. But that's the only thing. He has the ability to blow up both Iran and the United States. And he might be tempted to do that because his presidency is going down over this. That much is clear. And so he might want to take the world with him. And because of his ego, that would suck.
Fighting, and then the war just drags on and becomes even more deadly. So it looks like this, based off of this little piece alone, that the United States is going into this feeling like they have the upper hand, and that pushing a warship through the strait, Iran would not.
So Trump might, in these negotiations, insist on Iran's surrender because that's the only thing that can save him politically. And if he does that, they'll refuse, obviously, and then we're right back to him threatening to wipe out their civilization, which is what I expect to happen probably next week, since that's the one thing that really worked for him.
Risk firing at them and turning off the negotiations because Iran has too much to gain from the negotiations. So this, assuming this story is true of the Michael Murphy pushing through the Strait of Hormuz, which from what we can tell at this point, it is, that is a signal that the United States is entering into this feeling confident that we have the upper hand and that Iran is not willing to risk anything. Again, Iran did not get notification that the ship was in the Strait of Hormuz by looking out here. They would have had notification, advance warning as the ship moved up, and it would have taken a while. Okay, these ships aren't all that fast. So the fact that Iran did not report this until after the United States announced that the freedom of navigation maneuver was complete makes me believe that it did happen, and Iran is now using
Oh yeah, it did happen. It was geolocated here, and yeah, it went in. It was just a dangerous stunt by Trump administration that ultimately proves nothing because it wasn't a tanker. A tanker tries to do this, it's sunk. And the only reason the U.S. destroyer isn't sunk is because they did this under a ceasefire.
Framing it in a way to try to regain a little bit of stature there. Now, there's another aspect here also worth bringing up, money. And this is one that just popped up yesterday. But again, if this one is true, based off the reports we're seeing at this point, this one would actually suggest that Iran feels like they have the upper hand. Just earlier today, Iran Tasnim News said that they have agreed that all of the preconditions for talks have been met. They said there's been a reduction in Israeli strikes, shifting from Beirut to southern Lebanon, and Washington has accepted releasing Iranian assets. And because of this, talks are ready to begin. Now, couple notes there. First off, the Hezbollah and IDF fight over there in northern Israel, southern Lebanon has not stopped. It's still ongoing right now. So,
but I think he got Netanyahu to at least agree to a reduction of the bombings. Yeah, I said that yesterday. Yeah, Trump would be able to call Netanyahu and say, you know, for a few hours, so we can have these negotiations, stop bombing Lebanon for a few hours. That's probably, he has that much leverage over Israel, and Netanyahu will throw him that bone. And because I think it's practically guarantees these negotiations don't go well, because what Iran is demanding and what Trump is demanding, Trump needs complete surrender by Iran, because that's what he needs politically to survive. So that's what he's going to be asking for. Now, the one in the better position, the strong position, is Iran. It's winning by every metric, basically, by U.S. depleted inventory of both defensive and offensive weaponry, by the fact that Iran has successfully controlled the Strait of Hormuz for over a month now, by the fact that we've dropped all these bombs on Iran and the regime hasn't collapsed. Yeah, it's winning. It knows it's winning, and its demand reflect that it knows it's winning. So you have Iran demanding basically big surrender of Trump because they're winning, and you have Trump demanding surrender of Iran because that's what he needs politically to survive. I mean, he isn't interested in any agreement that doesn't give him a win so that he can survive politically from this. And so these negotiations have zero chance of succeeding. Zero. Zip. Nada.
Pretty notable that at this point, Iran just yesterday said, like, we are not going to talk until that fighting stops. That fighting has not stopped. It is still ongoing. And today, with all parties in Pakistan, they say, hey, it's a reduction. So we'll take the reduction. That is a signal that Iran might feel like they actually need to stick around for these talks, and they do not have the upper hand to be able to walk away right now based off of what they, less than 24 hours ago, called a violation of the ceasefire. The second part is the release of these funds. Now, a couple different sources, depending on who you look at, but somewhere around the $10 billion mark is the figure I've seen floated around there. The White House has said no. Like, they came out and said there have been no funds released. Now, in the reporting that I've seen, they've not argued whether or not Iran has been asking for that or whether or not it's been discussed or even agreed upon. But the statements have been no funds have been released to Iran. That's a big one. right? If we felt the need to, two things, two ways to look at that. First off, the funds did not come into the conversation until yesterday, at least publicly. So if Iran felt comfortable yesterday throwing out new demands, that would suggest that maybe they think they have the upper hand and can exact more concessions from the United States at the last minute. Also, if they are able to receive any number in there, $1 to $10 billion from the United States simply to sit down and talk about a ceasefire, that's a problem for us. Again, that would indicate that Iran, in that case, maybe even...
And there's no way to know what's really going on, because if Trump had released any funds, he certainly wouldn't be admitting it.
The United States views that Iran has the upper hand entering these talks. Now, Tasnim News added 4 fundamental and non-negotiable conditions for the mediators in Islamabad right now. And these are interesting because it's different than the 10-point plan. It's different than the 15-point plan. This is what Iran is saying, like, this has to happen or we won't sign anything. First, full sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Don't love that. If that's their starting point, that wasn't even on the table 2 months ago, right?
Yep.
If Iran...
We're much worse place today than we were before this war started. That's why it's a stupid war. If it's a war that drains our weapons, that we ultimately end up losing, how can it be a good war? That we failed to accomplish anything. Iran's probably going to get a nuke out of this. It's bad in every way for U.S.
would have, gone to the United Nations and said, hey, we're ready to talk, but we want full control over the Strait of Hormuz. I'm like, what are you talking about? So that's not good. That's a talking point right now, or one of their hard lines. They also want complete war reparations from the United States and Israel, unconditional release of all of their blocked assets, and a durable ceasefire across the entire West Asia region. So again, they're drawing their hard lines. I would say the United States has our hard lines as well. Israel's are a little bit different. But I wanted to bring this up because from what
Israel's are very different.
I can tell, this is the first time that the Iranian government or Iranian government-affiliated media is coming out saying, these are our red lines. These are the things that we have to accomplish in these talks, and they're adding to it, right? I mean, I think we really need to consider at this point that it is becoming increasingly likely that the Strait of Hormuz, the status quo over that major artery, is going to change. It's hard to see that we're going back to where it was before the war began. Yep. I'm optimistic that it's not going to be full Iranian control, but if Iran is now viewing that as one of their conditions to end the war at all, we have to probably be mindful that that could be one of the things the United States maybe cedes.
Yeah, because Trump doesn't, as long as the oil flows through the straits, Trump doesn't care as much if Iran charge a toll. I mean, that won't have that big an impact on the United States. As long as the oil flows through, they're paying $1 extra. If people in, like, Japan have to pay a little bit higher gas price so that he can get out of this war, he's fine with that.
On if we are able to achieve other objectives in these talks. So again, the next 24, 48 hours are going to be really significant. We'll find out. Is this actually something that we can bring it into at the negotiating table, or is the war just set to begin?
I don't think so, because to break it down to very, very simply, Trump needs a victory. He needs a victory because this war has been a disaster. It's already heavily damaged the global economy and will continue damaging the global economy, even if it's resolved now. And you're going to have higher gas prices in the United States over the summer because of this. Now, that's the reality. He needs a victory out of this to be able to say politically, okay, they're high gas prices, but I had this victory over Iran. So he needs a victory. Iran needs a U.S. loss. They need Trump to lose. That's their goal. Trump bombed their supreme leader, their pope. They are not okay with Trump walking away from this with a victory. It must be seen by the entire world as a defeat for Trump and the United States. That's what Iran fundamentally wants. The exact points, that doesn't matter as much. What it matters is, at the basic level, is perception. Trump needs a win. Iran wants Trump to lose. He's seen as a loser. And given that fundamental disagreement, and yeah, these negotiations are fucked.
Once more. Again, for anyone interested, the best place to keep up with all of this, not just my content, but also from the community, is on Substack. That link will be in the description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
Okay, so let's go over some other little things that are happening in the Middle East.
At the same time, within Israel, there is an extraordinary development. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. There's a new report here from A New Policy, which is an American lobbying organization for U.S. policy towards the Middle East, actually advancing national interests. Here's what they say, quote, sources tell us that a meeting yesterday between U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu devolved into a shouting match over Netanyahu's objections to U.S. plans to evacuate citizens from Israel and the wider region. U.S. officials believe that the Netanyahu objection was predicated on his desire to hold U.S. citizens at risk in order to increase the likelihood of U.S. entry into Israel's conflict with Iran. So let's sit on that for a little bit, shall we? First of all, there are 700,000 Americans, that is the current belief, within Israel. 700,000. I believe they have the
700,000 within, and yeah, Israel's population is pretty small to begin with, so he doesn't want to lose that many people, and they are convenient human shield. If a large number of them get killed, it puts pressure on the United States to stay into the war. That's my understanding.
Largest outside American citizen population than Mexico, which tells you quite a bit. However, there is a little bit of a difference, is that many of these people are dual citizens, according to the data that we have, but it also is being used as a pretext for why the United States has such a, quote, obligation to defend Israel. Now, let's just say Mexico. All right, so if Mexico, who do they share a border with? Guatemala? So if Guatemala was bombing Mexico, would we intervene to protect Americans in Mexico? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that logic works all that well. There's a secondary element to this, which is that currently, at least, a lot of these U.S. citizens don't seem to be allowed to leave. You know, we haven't seen yet some of the reports there, and obviously the flight situation there is pretty crazy. But almost every one of the other great powers has told their citizens to evacuate immediately. Yesterday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a statement that all Chinese citizens should leave Israel immediately. The Russian Foreign Ministry came out and said all Russian citizens should leave immediately. There's actually a huge Russian population in Israel. A lot of people don't know that. But the point is that those countries seem to have the ability to tell their citizens to leave. Right now, I believe we do have travel advisories and all of that, but the question is about their ability to do so. And this pairs, and this is already confirmed, this isn't even based on a report. Put this up there on the screen from Haaretz, which is an Israeli news organization. Israel tells airlines do not let Israeli citizens leave, even once repatriation flights are.
Isn't that insane? Israel tells airlines not to let Israeli citizens leave, even once repatriation flights start.
Are able to continue. Quote, estimates suggest rescue flights for Israelis stranded abroad won't begin before Thursday, and even then, only 2 flights per hour will be allowed during daylight. And the plan does not match the scale of the crisis. So, I mean, effectively what you're seeing is that they are locking their people, basically in their borders, in the same way that Ukraine tried to do so in order to force everybody to fight in the draft. And they're afraid, I guess, of the number of Israelis that do have dual citizenship all around the world who can.
Yeah, the IDF is in trouble. The worn-out troops and whatever, they don't mention that specifically, but having military-age men leave the country right now would not be good for Israel.
Take advantage of that and say, I'm getting the hell out of here. I don't want to fight in this war.
Yeah.
Or, hide in a bomb shelter every other day. Raises some profound questions about human shields and locking people basically in a death trap and forcing them of their own defeat. I'm not going to deny there's probably a lot of Israelis. I would say the vast majority of Israelis probably support this war based on all the polling that we've seen.
Agreed.
Let's be honest.
But there's probably a big portion of them, probably tens of thousands out of that 700,000 who want to get the hell out of there.
There's probably, at least some of them want to leave, and I think that the action by the Israeli government speaks volumes.
Yeah, they don't want. So first of all, to go back to U.S. citizens,
that's a big
being
question.
blocked from leaving. We don't know if they were able to actually, convince Huckabee and the U.S. administration of that policy. But what they're saying here, they want to use American citizens as human shields. Like that is what that means, and they want to use American citizens as pawns in their game to try to force an escalation and force us to come in on their side. I guarantee you, they are praying for the Iranians to hit some U.S. military base and to kill some American service members so that the war fever picks up here in the U.S. And
it won't. If Iran hits a U.S. military base in the middle of the war after we bomb their supreme leader, it's not like they attacked us unaggressed, like Pearl Harbor, Japan sneak attack on us. Yes, that's a completely different story. It galvanizes the U.S. against it. But Iran, we sneaked attack them. So if we then get hit back from that, most people say, yeah, we started this. You have a completely different psychological effect if there's lots of U.S. deaths. More like, why the fuck are we fighting this war over there? Anyway, let's move on to next one.
Let's get to the next part here, and this is about some of the stuff going on inside of Israel. And look, a lot of this is very counter-narrative, and it's definitely counter to a lot of what you're going to hear on national television. Let's start with the first one, because this is very important to me. Let's put it up there on the screen. Israel is now running low on defensive interceptors. So this is
Yeah, this is what we've been predicting from the beginning of the war, and reality is we're there. Israel has barely any air defenses left.
According to U.S. officials, quote, raising concerns about the country's ability to counter long-range ballistic missiles. Now, this actually fits with something we're about to show you, which were some strikes by the Iranians on downtown Tel Aviv, or sorry, in populated areas of Israel in the middle of the day. Now, why does this matter? And actually put this out on Twitter, Crystal. There's been a lot made on cable news about the, stupendous Israeli operation against the Iranians and the incompetence of the Iranian military. You can't deny that. When you have guys in a single bunker and your whole command and control structure is getting taken out, yeah, that's pretty embarrassing. Not even embarrassing. It's just basic incompetence at that level. Their ability to basically be penetrated by Mossad and all that. Humiliating. But what does it say about Israel that they launch an operation and less than a week later, they are already running out of interceptors? And so what does that say? Well, it says that, who does have some interceptors? Oh, me, actually.
I am extremely sorry. This sounded wrong, and I see why. I don't know how I ended up with a video from 9 months ago. I will have to cut that out for the YouTube. Yes, that sounded wrong. Okay, what's this about?
Had the announcement of Donald Trump, the president of the United States, that there are going to be some sort of talks for 2 weeks, 2 weeks of ceasefire to talk, to negotiate, to do something about putting an end to the conflict. And it doesn't seem that Israel is happy with that. But what is, Ted, when it comes to Israel, because we had the attack on Lebanon, they don't like it. It doesn't seem Netanyahu likes it, and it's what is happening.
Interesting.
Ukrainians.
This one is interesting.
About the terms, the fighting in Lebanon intensified, with the Israelis resisting all attempts to try and get them to slow down. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz remains firmly under Iranian control, and they continue to insist that ships that pass must pay them a $2 million fee, and that, in fact,
traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has actually gone down since the ceasefire was announced.
On the first day of the ceasefire, which was Wednesday, the number of ships that passed through the Strait of Hormuz actually fell as compared with what was the case the days before. And there's massive uncertainty in the shipping industry. Ship owners are very nervous about sending their ships to the Strait of Hormuz. The London insurance market is refusing to allow ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz because they're very worried about what the real situation is, and they're worried that the ceasefire might break down entirely. And there's a report in the Financial Times which is speaking now about
they should be worried about that, because I see no way for it to succeed.
An absolute rush in the British oil markets to try and buy physical oil at much higher prices than the ones that you are seeing, because there's worries about a continued oil shortage. And there's word that unless the situation with the Strait of Hormuz is resolved in a week's time, the situation is going to get much more critical on the markets as well.
No, I don't. Just wanted to check. Yep, they're still under 100. The real price is like 140. The futures are just trading completely
Ukrainians are now
outside reality.
But that doesn't seem to be the problem. For some kind of
is the overall situation looking like at the moment?
First of all, gentlemen, as we're all Orthodox, today's Good Friday. So happy Good Friday, Orthodox Pascha. And maybe we'd have some good news. We at least have a ceasefire that lasted to Monday. In reality, we had a ceasefire that lasted about 4 hours because the Israelis are the spoilers. They're the people in the driver's seat. And Trump, to begin with, to understand, Trump likes bombastic statements, particularly when the markets are closed, and they were closed for Catholic and Protestant Easter. He makes these big bombastic statements. The markets can't quite react. And when the markets are all in a dizzy and they get back, and he does something to get out of it. So I think he knew that they were going to sign up for some kind of ceasefire, because these negotiations didn't happen overnight. He makes these statements, I'm going to destroy this whole civilization. Everybody starts screaming, oh, nuclear weapons. Everybody gets very anxious. And then he comes out with, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to ceasefire. So he gets himself off the hook. And then he'll kick the can down the road somehow. Unfortunately, the 10 points, whether he actually read those 10 points, I'm assuming Marco Rubio maybe read those 10 points.
Apparently threw them in the trash the instant he read them.
I'm assuming one of those key 10 points, as was written by Sharif, by the way, from Pakistan, was that Iran and the U.S. and their allies, which in the case of Iran would mean Hezbollah, Hamas, Yemen, and Iraq, all stand down. And obviously Israel and the U.S. stand down, which would mean stop massacring people in Lebanon to the Israeli government. And the Israeli government said, hell no. And the opposition to Netanyahu, their biggest criticism was, we weren't at the table and we need to massacre faster. We need more massacres. We're not massacring hard enough. So that's the Israeli politics. But the Israelis have turned out to be in the driver's seat. And we've seen Marco Rubio come out and said, and Vance, both by the way Catholics. And there are Catholics as well as Orthodox being butchered in Lebanon, but that doesn't seem to be the problem. And they came out and said, it wasn't really ever part of this whole deal. And the Iranians said it was, and now we're back to square one. Whether this holds or not, we'll live and see.
Yeah, apparently Israel managed to stop the bombings long enough for there to actually be negotiations today. We'll see how that turns out tomorrow, but I'm not hopeful.
But the straits were never really closed to begin with, and oil exports were still going on out of the Gulf. Yes, they dropped precariously, in fact, from about 25, 26 million barrels a day down to about 9. The Iranians, one of the biggest complaints of the U.S. from the very beginning was they started exporting even more oil than they were exporting before the conflict started. And then, of course, the U.S. takes the sanctions off, which means export even more. I think this is a first in military history where the country you want to attack, you unsanction while attacking them.
I was a little bit amazed when I first heard that Trump was unsanctioning Russian and Iranian oil. That was incredible. How desperate must he have been? How bad must have the situation been behind the scenes in the financial system, in the derivatives market, for him to do that extreme step?
The Saudis are continuing to export oil into the Red Sea. Of course, that pipeline's been hit, but unless I'm not sure where they hit it because I haven't seen exact details. But unless they hit
A pumping station.
it in a pumping station, if they just hit it on the pipeline, that's easily repairable. That's a couple days down. They'll
Yeah, so why would they do that?
Russian new pipe cut off the. Well, even the pipes are connected by phalanges, so there's only sections of pipe. Replace a section of pipe with a new pipe and get everything back up and running. Now, if you take out a pumping station, that's a much more difficult issue. There are ships that are still leaving with oil, for example, to Pakistan from other suppliers. And what the Iranians have always said was they never closed per se for all oil. They said go neutral, don't buy in dollars. So I'm assuming euros will still work because they indicated yuan, but they were saying don't buy in US dollars. So if you're buying British pound, sterling, or you're buying
Or crypto or whatever.
euro, that should apparently still work. And from the American point of view, of course, the straits being closed is actually not a bad thing because America doesn't get that much oil. America is the biggest producer of oil at 13.8 million.
That's pretty naive view. Derivative markets and the financial stock markets are very vulnerable to all this. And you have 35% of the world's fertilizer that is also not moving. And you have natural gas. It's a big deal. Okay, it is a bigger deal in the places like Japan that completely rely on the Middle East. But it's still going to have an impact in the United States.
Million barrels per day. That was last year's high. And that was a high. It had gone down and they got it back up. How long they can keep that is a good question. But they do still import oil. And no, Venezuela is not the answer right now. It could be a large part of the answer in the future, but not at this present moment. I'll get to that in a minute. But this becomes a problem for the Europeans. And when Trump said, well, you just go and get it, get your own oil and punch your way through the Straits of Hormuz. But they wouldn't have to do that. That's the whole problem. Is the Europeans could quite literally go down there and go, we're not going to buy in dollars. We'll buy in euro. We'll buy in rubles or whatever other currency. Can we pass? Pay them a $2 million toll. The Iranians had stepped back from reparations because the U.S. would never pay reparations. I have been wrong when I said the U.S. never paid reparations. Apparently, the U.S. paid Vietnam.
Allowing Iran to collect a toll would be the same thing as reparation. It would be a way for them to get a lot of money and build their country. And so, I think the demand for U.S. to directly pay reparations is the one thing they'd most be willing to give ground on. That demand.
Reparations like $250 million for 4 generations or a third generation of mutations and deformalities in the population, plus 3 million civilians they killed in the Vietnam War. Not much money for that, but they're never going to pay the reparations to Iran. But this way, Iran gets the reparations without America going insane about it or American congressmen screaming. Because again, it doesn't really hit the U.S. It does hit the overall oil market because it is an added cost. But I don't think it's that much of an added cost to push. I mean, considering how much oil markets have already gone up, you'd still see a drop if the straits opened up with just a toll. And Iran's now indicating.
Agreed. The oil would go down, but it probably trade 20 or $30 barrels higher than before for a while, just because of all the disruptions that have happened so far. 6 months or a year, it might drop down to like $15 above where it used to be because of the toll and long-lasting damage to structure.
That they're willing to split that toll with Oman. So it makes it kind of an international, because the straits quite literally go through both of their territorial waters. They don't have to let anyone in. It's their territorial waters, not neutral waters. So they've got that option. And overall, it's not going to be a big a hit if you can get all the oil going. Now we've got the problem of terminals destroyed, refineries destroyed or damaged, and that's going to have a much longer effect. In fact, the other day, the Iranians hit the, I'm going to butcher the name of this, it's in Saudi Arabia, El Jubaili oil facility. It didn't say which one. I think that was more likely from the looks of it, that was a cleaning facility. Because once you get the oil out of the ground, you have to clean it. Sorry, because the oil is not just oil coming out. There's water in there. There's acids in there. Lots of chemicals underground, deep underground. There's sand. All of that has to be filtered out just to get the pure oil, and the pure oil is what's shipped.
Understandable.
So all these additional ingredients have to be cleared out. It's a pretty big facility. I was a consultant in one of these facilities up in northern Sakhalinsk that Exxon Neftegaz, daughter of ExxonMobil, owned. It's not as big as a refinery, but still a pretty big facility. But all of this is going to have to take time to repair, and that's oil. And the problem in the world, if you give it a year, 2 years, the markets will start to solve themselves.
Yeah, but a year or 2 years, it's too late. Strait of Hormuz rain closed 6 months, tanks the world economy. A year or two, it's too far down the line.
Because there'll be increased production, additional wells. Now, to bring a brand new oil field to economic fruition takes between 3 to 5 years. That's from drilling the first Wildcat well. I'm not quite sure why they call it Wildcat well. Never did find out. But what it means basically is geologists will go, okay, somewhere in this formation, we've done sonar testing. We kind of know what kind of formation. Somewhere in this formation, there should be oil. We don't know, of course, because unless it's bubbling out, it's not the old Jed went hunting and shot the ground, Mr. Rabbit shot the ground, and oil comes up. There actually used to be kind of in some areas like that, oil was at the very top of the ground. You had the lagoons. All those are gone for over 100 years now because they've all been drained for their product. Now you have to actually do drilling. So what you do is you kind of look at the map, you look at the sonar map and go, let's drill here. Oh, nothing there. Let's drill there. And that's called wildcat drilling. And you're trying to figure out where that actual deposit is, or even if you hit a deposit, where that actual main portion is to have enough pressure. So that's your time lag. Like, plus then you have to build in the infrastructure to bring that oil to market and for people to be able to work there. So it all takes time.
It's 3 to 5 years, like I said, to bring some more new online.
And that's a brand new field, greenfielding a new oil field or gas field. Now, the North Sea obviously had the British have been pumping oil out of there for the last, 80 years, 90 years, maybe longer, because prior to World War II. That you can expand on that. You can build on that. Still going to take a year to 2 years to get enough platforms out there to expand production. And there is a limited production there. You can start pumping oil again around the Netherlands. Problem with that is subsidence of the soil, which means you pump it out, seawater comes in, washes out the limestone and the ground underneath, and the ground starts falling. So, which is one of the reasons the gas and oil production was cut off in those areas. But I guess if you're desperate enough, that is something that can be returned. Russia has north of Arkhangelsk in the sea. Russia has over $1 trillion of light sweet crude. I was a supply chain director.
So, one message of this is you don't have to worry about the world running out of oil anytime soon.
And Halliburton for Eurasia, when the Russians, Halliburton was supporting Rosneft and Exxon on their first Wildcat well. This is before Obama told them leave. Exxon said, well, let's just finish this one well. It's like, fine, finish, and then you're leaving. Force majeure, you're leaving. Well, the first Wildcat well, 2,000 meters under the surface, hits light sweet crude. And that one area was about $1 billion, I think they said about $100 billion worth. And there's at least 10 more locations like that around that. There's about $1 trillion worth of oil. Exxon lost all 10% of it they were supposed to get off of it because force majeure, Obama said out, so they're out. The problem in the north is it's in the sea. So you have only a 3-month drilling window before the sea ice gets so.
This isn't really directly related to Iran, but I find this interesting. So
thick it'll literally crush the legs of the platforms. There's only one Arctic grade platform. It's owned by Gazprom. There's no others in the world. So and those areas are owned by Rosneft. So to do that, you have to bring equipment, and you have a very narrow window, and you have to stage in a place like Murmansk the winter before and get it ready. And it's 1,000 kilometers. You have to pull the platform out too. You can't stage in Arkhangelsk because Arkhangelsk freezes over during the winter. Murmansk doesn't. It's on the edge of the Gulf Stream or one of the wings of the Gulf Stream. So. And that could be done. Then there's Venezuela, because everyone's, well, we can get out of Venezuela. Well, never mind. Venezuela is heavy sulfur, the crude, which is very thick. The problem in Venezuela is, and this is partially Chavez's and Maduro's fault, partially the American fault, is it can only produce 800,000 barrels. And if you really push the equipment to the breaking point, which it's already at, you may be able to get 1 million for a while before you start having massive problems. That's because those social programs aren't free, and they pulled a lot of the money out of the oil industry.
Oil infrastructure needs maintenance. And they spent money on healthcare instead of maintaining their oil infrastructure.
That was going for repairs and for renewal of equipment into the social programs. And then the Americans, of course, froze all those assets over too and didn't give them money. So they got the oil sector was screwed from two ends. So at this point, what Exxon and what Chevron have said, they're looking.
Yeah, and another added difficulty in Venezuela is that U.S. companies are very hesitant to go in and spend billions of dollars building oil infrastructure that maybe might be seized again in the future by Venezuela government, because we didn't change the regime. We just took out the Maduro. Well, the entire rest of the regime is in there. And what's to prevent Venezuela from taking over infrastructure again in the future? U.S. doesn't here willing or able at this point in time to go in and do anything like conquer the country or put troops on the ground. So that is that is the biggest factor that's limiting investment in Venezuela, is the political uncertainty.
Looking at 3 years at about $100 billion to get it up to about 2 million barrels a day. About $300 to $400 billion in at least 5 years to get it to full capacity, about 4 or 5 million barrels a day. It's there, and the possibility is there, and you could probably do it faster if you're desperate enough and you bring in a lot of equipment, a lot of people. But we're not there yet for that kind of desperation. There's other oil fields.
And again, all of this is more than 6 months, so that doesn't help us. Strait of Hormuz will remain closed 6 months. The world economy is fucked.
There's oil fields south of Alaska that have been put off put on hold. Well, not even on hold. They've been banned from being exploited so far, anyways. But again, that's 3 to 5 years or more in the deep sea. So but the crisis is here. The crisis, it's not coming. The crisis is already here. So that becomes the problem. And what do you do? Well, we're seeing what's happening. Countries are cutting back. Countries are telling people to stay home. Economies are suffering. We'll have a world recession no matter what. But the biggest problem is gas. Gas quite literally just dropped. 20% of gas is off the market. There's no fast alternatives. Even if you switch on Nord Stream, that'll fix a little bit of the hole. But by the way, that's only for about 3 to 4 years till the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline is built through Mongolia, which is going to get very rich off of this, and into China. And then the whole Yamal gas fields, they're all under contract to China. So either way, at least in the short term, you might get some gas into Europe and Germany anyways. But in the long term, that's still not available to Europe anymore. You'd have to find new gas fields and build them up and start exploiting them. So that's a problem in any direction. But what's even worse with gas, I'll tell you, 80% of gas usage in any country, an industrial country, is industry. Very little gas is needed to actually heat homes. It's about in Germany, it was about under 20%. The rest was all industry. It's gone up as a percentage because it's deindustrialized. But the problem is when you deindustrialize to cut gas costs, people lose jobs, and then there's the secondary ripple effect of the companies that service those.
Yes, and that's just going to accelerate in Europe. They cut themselves off from Russia. Now they're cut off from Gulf in terms of oil and gas. And they're going to get cut off from the United States when Trump put export restrictions on natural gas and oil, which he will do to try to win the midterms.
Those companies, the companies that service those employees, they all start to lose money and they all go out of business. And you get this massive unemployment. They can't afford to heat their homes anymore because they don't have paychecks. So the government either has to watch people freeze and probably rebel, or they have to do something, set up some kind of programs with what money. That's the problem for the politicians. So either way, you get cascade effects. But the worst one, again, is going to be the lack of food. You're looking, the whole green revolution is built.
Yes, the whole green revolution. Green revolution was this idea of they changed the way farming was done. The genetically modified crops that require a huge amount of fertilizer and produce a ton more food, which is great as long as you have fertilizer. When you stop having fertilizer, your crop yields go down in half.
On artificial fertilizers that doubled yields. European fields, you're looking, they're not black earth. Russia is an example. While it produces 40% of the fertilizers,
Russia has this really rich earth called black earth that can produce a lot of crops without fertilizer. And it's basically like potting soil in the ground, like 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters deep.
Sold in the world. For its own usage, it uses about 1/4 of what the European Union uses as fertilizer, because Russia has black earth. The black earth is only located basically from western Ukraine through up to thin areas up to Mongolia or up to the Altai Mountains. But it's that steppe. It's a unique area in the world. Germany has a little bit of them because they were stealing black earth during World War II. The German trucks were quite literally, when they were heading back to Germany, the trucks that were supporting the Wehrmacht, they were loaded up with black earth and they were shipping it out for their own farms. One of those little facts most people have never heard of, but the fact of World War II. So Russia doesn't need that much because it can continue producing, but Europe does. Well, non-Russian Europe does. So you're probably looking at, yields halving. Plus all these anti-farm in Western Europe, anti-farm legislatures. They're probably very thrilled with this.
This crisis hits next year. The prices food prices probably hit their highest maybe right around New Year's. It'll be bad. People will starve.
They're trying to destroy the farm, the agriculture.
Yeah, we're also reaching the window where if the Strait of Hormuz opened today, you could get fertilizer out and maybe save some of these crops. The planting season, the time where you can get fertilizer on the ground and really make a difference. That window to make it happen is closing. So this food crisis is nearly locked in at this point. Give it just another few more weeks.
Agriculture sector in the Netherlands, in France, in Britain. It's idiotic, but conspiracy. Well, maybe it's not a conspiracy. They say, he who controls the food sources controls the population. So maybe there's something to that. Begin to think they may be. But either way,
no. This like the Ukraine, Iran was just the deep state, Trump, everyone involved in launching it thought that it'd be over in 3 days. It was just stupidity and wishful thinking, desperation on part of the deep state. They needed Iran to collapse in 3 days. That's what they needed. They didn't get it.
Yields are going to be down a lot, and we're going to start to see that, I think, around June when the first crops, the early crops, start coming in, and they're small. And then you're going to start having more panic on the market, serious panic on the market. And at least Europe is rich enough that the middle class and the upper class will still be able to get food. The lower class.
Yes, when there's a food shortage, it's always the poor who starve. And there's always food available. Even during the worst famines, there is places with plenty of food. It's because people with money buy the food. People without money don't. That's who starves.
Classes, I think, may in some countries in Europe have starvation, quite literal starvation. I was talking to friends in. I have a friend, Lorenzo. He's a politics professor in Italy. He's saying, before this, poor Italian families are already having a hard time feeding themselves for the fourth week of the month. If food prices go up 30-40%, you're looking at the lower classes quite literally starving. And that's not even talking about places like Africa or Southeast Asia that need a lot more fertilizer and are a lot more precarious positions. So that's a situation. I mean, the markets will correct themselves with time, but we don't have the time right now. I mean, we're going to have to live through this year one way or the other.
Well, so another quick point.
Yeah,
Firstly,
no, we don't have
talking
time.
about the attack on the on the Saudi facility, the Red Sea facility. I heard that it was a pumping station.
It
Now, I
was.
don't know that for a fact because I'm not there, but I actually heard that
Right.
it was in fact a pumping station, not a pipe. I think that whoever attacks these facilities knows what they are, what is going to hurt, and what the damage is. Again, we don't know where to do the damage. I don't know how big the damage was, and that's just what I have heard. So that's the first thing.
Mhm.
The second is this: the Financial Times is saying that if the Strait of Hormuz remains under Iranian control in the way that it is, and the United States, there seems to be under a lot of pressure to try and find ways to persuade the Iranians to relax control of it. That put aside all of the supply, the actual underlying supply issues that you've talked about, the psychological effect on the markets. It will hit home with them in about a week's time that there is not going to be a return to pre-war normality in the global energy markets if the situation.
The financial markets can be manipulated. You can increase the paper supply. You can have Trump make more unrealistic promises. I said that they would try to keep the prices of oil down a month or two. So banks could reposition themselves for higher oil prices, and the whole derivative market doesn't collapse when you have a drastic rise in oil prices. We're slowly, another week or two, we're slowly getting to the part where I expect, they're going to be finally let oil prices surge over 100.
Continues for a further week. Now, I've never worked in energy markets, but does that seem sensible to you? Does that make sense to you? Because, of course, an event that happens, if it strikes in a week, it has political consequences. We have local elections in Britain, for example, which are very important. We have the midterms in the United States in November. We have other elections going on.
Those are going to be a disaster for Trump. The Strait of Hormuz, already now, the amount of pain he's going to get out of this economically, pretty big. It's going to filter in over the next few months, but it stays closed another 5 months. It's game over for the midterms for Republicans, unfortunately.
In Europe all the time. And by the way, the deindustrialization processes that are happening in Europe are no longer confined to Germany. Britain is deindustrializing now at an exceptional pace.
Industry can be regarded as a country's income. The living standard and ultimately the wealth of a country is determined by its producing sector, which is like farming and industry combined. And to some extent, tech sector, in that it produces and can sell goods, can be included. Everything else is service sector, and service sector services the producing sector. Now, temporarily, that can go out of line if government borrows from abroad, from overseas, then spends the money domestically. Yes, you can have an oversized service sector, but that doesn't last forever. And so you have this situation where in UK, whatever, they're being deindustrialized. Government can borrow to make up for that for a while, but once that ability to borrow by the government is gone, yeah, you're going to have the whole economy crash down, the service sector shrink till it's the same size as the producing sector of the economy, industry and whatever. So deindustrialization, that's basically nearly, that is basically UK, Germany and other things, stop being first world countries, basically. If you don't have an industry, you're not a first world country long term. Period.
The steel industry has practically collapsed. I'm hearing stories about problems in the car industry, in all sorts of industrial sectors. Things are starting to go south fast. Glass, all sorts of things like this are being affected. And of course, the farm industry in Britain is in very, very deep trouble, especially as the government, the Labour government, has been trying to increase taxes on it, which sounds extraordinary, but that's what they've been trying to do. So is it true that we're going to have we have about a week left before the psychological hit of all of this comes through?
That's just arbitrary number by the Financial Times. It could be 2 weeks. It could be, it'll be whatever they need to manipulate it on. I watched them keep food prices down for 6 months back in 2009 after a terrible harvest, just for that reason of the financial system being very fragile after the 2008 financial crisis, and to avoid all hell breaking loose in derivative markets, they suppressed food prices, lied about U.S. harvests being bigger than they were. And then when food prices spiked 2010, that's when we had your riots in Egypt and other places throughout the Middle East. Oil prices are a little different in that that can't be manipulated as long just because of the way the oil market works, whereas food harvest comes in and that slowly gets consumed, over the year. So they could manipulate that for 6 months. Oil, I think 1 or 2 months is, well, all they can manage with something as big as Strait of Hormuz being closed. And that's what they're going to do, that, of course. Limit the damage in derivative markets as much as possible.
Honestly, I'm surprised it still hasn't come through. The markets are an interesting place because
I'm not. Anyone who's watching me since like the first week of this thing, as I said, they'd keep the price of oil capped under 100, or as much as they could. It's only spiked above that a few times briefly, but yeah, once you know that the U.S. financial system collapses if it goes over like 100, if it reaches 120, yeah, they're going to prevent it. They're going to keep it under 100. So I knew it because it had to be that way.
people like to say, oh, it's 20% emotion. No, I think it's more like 50, 60% emotion. If you look at the fundamentals, those market prices should have...
And those emotions can be manipulated by the media, by Trump making these assurances, by selling paper future contracts to reassure people that way. Selling paper future contracts, even if those contracts ends up losing money, the derivatives based on those contracts, to avoid losses on those, it's still worth it.
Much higher by this point. Now, there is one other. There's 2 other issues I didn't mention. One is Ukraine, because Ukraine is actively Ukraine has actively attacked the Caspian pipeline consortium, which, by the way, is one. It's majority owned by Chevron, so they're attacking American interests. As the port facility is actually in Novorossiysk, which is southwestern Russia. But the pipeline comes out of Kazakhstan, and it's Kazakhstani oil. And Kazakhstan and the U.S. have lost about $9 billion worth of oil revenues from the pipelines being attacked, from the office buildings being attacked. And there was a Greek, about 3 weeks ago, there was a Greek vessel that was coming in.
Yes. So if you pay high prices at the pump, know that Ukraine played a small part in that too, in screwing over the oil market.
Full of, it was empty, it was coming in to fill up, and the Ukrainians attacked it with a drone. But I guess they didn't want to take sides in the Greco-Turkish conflict, so a week later they attacked a Turkish tanker full of oil that had already paid for, by the way, in Turkish territorial waters. And now Ukraine is actively trying to destroy the pumping stations for Turk gas, which feeds Southeast Europe. And, by the way, the Turks are now flat out stating Ukraine is their enemy. Ukraine is trying to destroy Turkey. This is from the Turks nuzzling up to Ukraine and feeding them, even though they're trying to play both sides. They're really more nuzzling.
Yeah, Turkey was siding with Ukraine, and then Ukraine went and betrayed them.
Ukraine sending in mercenaries, sending them equipment like Bayraktars, building them a fleet.
That's when one side is about to lose, and they know they're about to lose. They get desperate and do crazy things. That's Ukraine right now. Biting the hand that feeds them. In case of Turkey, for example, and countries around the world actually that don't want oil prices going higher than they already have. Every Ukraine attack on the Russian oil infrastructure is hurting the price of oil, pushing it higher. And the same applies to Trump. He, by now, must politically know that this Iran war he's already lost some of his biggest supporters, like Tucker Carlson, etc. He must know that this could completely end his presidency. And he's desperate to get a win out of this Iran war for validation to survive politically. And so he's going to demand Iran surrender, although he has no negotiating position to make this happen. And if he doesn't get that, he might throw a temper tantrum and bomb the hell out of Iran, and the entire Middle East goes up in flames, and we're all fucked.
That they haven't finished yet, sending him armored vehicles, sending him ammunition, and this is what you get. You lay with curs, you get fleas, and they've got a very bad infestation of fleas, because not only will the Turkish economy take a massive hit from not having enough gas, and apparently some of the pumping stations have been damaged. Not only the Turkish economy going to take a massive hit, Turkey is going to lose a lot of revenue from what it gains from reselling that gas upstream to Southeast and Central Europe. So now we're looking at Central Europe going bust. So the EU made its bed with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are now doing what the Ukrainians always do. They're going to screw everybody as hard as they can, and the Europeans are going to suffer even more. And yet Brussels continues to give them more money, which is the insanity in trying to remove Orban and replace him with a national trader that's going to do whatever Brussels wants and raise costs inside of Hungary for energy. So that's what one. There is a slight bright point. You can make gas at home if you have coal. It's called coal gas. Coal gas was natural gas. Most people don't know this. Gas has been around, used for heating and lighting for about 150 years. But natural gas came into effect after World War II. Before that, you had coal gas. You want to talk about nasty stuff. Because what you do is coal gas is you have a facility, you burn coal at a relatively low, slow burn temperature, and you pump lots and lots of water vapor into the chamber. The water vapor takes up a lot of the gas that comes up from the slow burn of coal, so you get coal gas, and then you pump it downstream and it burns. That's when people had the gas lights inside their houses, and the pipe coming up, very, very hazardous for your health and for your home's health. But that used to be the technology, and then having a gas lamp inside the house with a pipe coming up, and that was usually a localized coal gas facility. The modern technology allows you to drill into the coal basins underground, and you start to burn it underground, so you don't have an above ground facility, and you're pumping water vapor in there, and then you're just pumping out the coal gas. It's not the cheapest thing, but it can be done, and at the turn of the century, prior to World War II, anyways, particularly prior to World War I, there was almost every village and every town had one of these coal gas stations. Dirty work, and the men that fed the coal in there into the furnaces usually died relatively early from lung cancer. But back then it wasn't particularly automated. But there's a facility. But again, that's still going to take time. But that's one way you can get around doing the...
Global warming activists are not going to be happy if this becomes widespread, if people turn back to this for natural gas.
Natural gas. Go back to the older technologies.
Because coal is one thing that doesn't come from the Middle East, and one thing that we can still get in big supply.
Now, England's going to have a problem because England's took the ever-wise move of filling in the coal mines and building estates on top of them. So you have to move a lot of people off and raise the estates and start opening the mines again, which would give a lot of work to people for once. So there's that possibility. But again, that's medium term. That's at least 2-3 years of preparation and get things done.
So the EU does have energy that they refuse to use. Suicidal. Killing in your own coal mines, God.
There's no fast answer here. It's too late. Fast answer is not to start this war.
It would not take 2 or 3 years in Britain. It would be more like 10 or 20. And the politics of it are absolutely unthinkable. I mean, the level of opposition from some sections of society to doing anything like that, even in conditions of economic crisis and stress, would remain extraordinarily difficult to overcome. So that's a few things to say. Now, just a few things. Let's talk about Ukraine, and maybe we can just talk about where we are, because you're quite right about Turkey and Ukraine. It's a completely unremarked.
Okay, let's.
Welcome back. We are joined today by Max Blumenthal, journalist, author, and editor-in-chief at the media outlet The Grey Zone. And I will make sure to leave a link to it in the description. So thank you again for coming back on the program.
Thanks a lot, Glenn. Great to be back.
So according to the New York Times, part of the problem with, or one of the reasons for Trump engaging in this disastrous war was that the Israelis apparently had a key role in convincing him. Now you, not just in the past, you have made this very strong argument that the Israeli influence in the U.S. is quite powerful to the extent that you essentially have Israeli agents in the White House. I was wondering how how intrusive is this influence?
Well, it's all encompassing, and it defines Donald Trump's entire career. And, even if you go back to Fred Trump, gifting land to the Chabad Lubavitch cult, which has a very pronounced presence in Donald Trump's inner circle, it goes back to his father's time. Donald Trump's entire world is surrounded. I mean, his world, his political world is defined by pro-Israel billionaires who are his counterparts. Coming up in New York, Charles Kushner, for example, who is also a very corrupt real estate baron. Howard Lutnick was someone who was in Trump's world as the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, and someone who was also closely connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Steve Witkoff was Trump's longtime golfing buddy, major real estate baron, who's very much a part, along with his sons, of the Zionist political world and the Zionist movement. And so when Donald Trump was running for president, however, he wasn't fully locked and loaded with the Likud mindset. And you can see that in his first speech, which I always come back to the Republican Jewish Coalition, which is effectively run by the Adelsons, was run by the Adelsons. They have their annual convention at the Sands Casino, which is owned by the late casino baron Sheldon Adelson. And Donald Trump appeared there, I think it was 2015 or 2016. And he made some comments that were unacceptable and said, you guys are, all in real estate. I know you guys. We need to make a deal. We need to make a deal between the Israelis and Palestinians. He was already thinking, I'm going to get a Nobel Peace Prize and I'm going to solve the world's most intractable conflict because I know all the people that are on Israel's side and it should be easy to move them. And they called him an anti-Semite for saying that. And they said, he's playing on stereotypes that Jews are.
I've heard that story once before. It's so he isn't locked into the Israeli side, but I think they've gained a lot of influence on him since then.
We're all involved in real estate and we're all slumlords. But the real problem was that Donald Trump said, you're going to make a deal. We will have a Palestinian state. That was the problem, because that's what the Adelsons have been working against. That's what the RJC was working against. So the next thing you know, Donald Trump appears on Capitol Hill. It was the first time I've ever seen him in person. And it was an anti-Iran deal rally, a rally to cancel Obama's signature JCPOA. Ted Cruz was there, Tel Aviv.
And that is another huge factor that fucked Trump into this war, because by canceling the Iran deal, he had no choice but to attack Iran, because what is he going to do? Sign exactly the same type of deal with Iran? That was the only alternative for preventing Iran from getting a nuke. There's a lot of influence for sure. Unfortunately, no matter what he says, many will automatically take the opposing position. Yeah.
Ted, he's always been a huge recipient of AIPAC money. His office is basically run by Israelis. I'm not being glib when I say that. Like, an Israeli operative is his main legislative aide. But no one cared that Ted Cruz was there. You could see who was going to win, who was going to be president by being at this rally, which was clearly sponsored by Adelson or some Israel lobby forces that wanted to cancel the Iran deal. It was Donald Trump. As soon as he gets there, people just converge on this field in front of the U.S. Capitol, and Donald Trump is like far and away the front runner. And you had all these pundits, mainstream pundits, saying Trump will never become president. He's never going to win out of this primary. The Clintons had this Pied Piper strategy to elevate Trump because they thought he'd be the easiest to defeat. But it was at that point when he made this bargain to shatter the Iran deal, the JCPOA, which suggested that there was a deeper bargain to actually go to war with Iran. But first he had to set the stage for the war, that Donald Trump was going to be the front runner.
No, I don't think Trump is not that savvy internationally. For him, he was like, okay, I'll promise to rip up this deal and they'll give me cash for this election. Yeah, it was more along those lines. And going into Iran is because Netanyahu promised him a 3-day war. So he said, okay, fine, they give me a lot of money during my election campaign. I'll go in and I'll do their 3-day war without fucking clue what he was about to unleash.
He was going to get hundreds of millions of dollars from the Adelsons, and then other, what I would call Israel first billionaires, would supplement that support. And in the American system, that counts for a whole lot. Pretty much, I mean, the presidential campaign is really a campaign for who can raise more money. Paul Singer started to donate to Donald Trump. This was someone, remember, Paul Singer was the original donor to the Steele dossier, which was created to discredit Trump and paint him as a Russian asset. Paul Singer was actually originally a never-Trumper. He was a neoconservative who was sponsoring candidates like Marco Rubio, because one of the things was Paul Singer has a gay son. And so he believed in the right of men to marry other men in the United States. And Donald Trump was seen as too conservative and too close to the Christian right. Paul Singer eventually came around and said, what matters more is we have a war with Iran, and Donald Trump will do what I want. So Donald Trump brought all of these figures on board by 2016. And while he was promising this war on the deep state, he was adopting figures like John Bolton into his cabinet because he would see him every night on Fox News. Mike Pompeo, arch-Christian Zionist.
And those people were deep state, and they betrayed him in the first term. His entire administration was basically working against him in this first term. and that's why he accomplished relatively little.
He sidelined. Steve Bannon was quickly sidelined, someone who believed in the America First agenda. There were still voices in Trump's ear, like Tucker Carlson, in the first term, who were influential and may have actually stopped the war with Iran. But you could clearly see Donald Trump moving towards the ultimate goal, suggesting there had always been this bargain behind the curtains to wage war with Iran. That's why he assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian major general, who is the second most.
I think that is something I don't know if Trump had this great idea. He was just fulfilling his end of the bargain from the Israeli support. And Trump didn't want the type of Iran war that we've gotten. He did not want that. He was not on board for that. I guarantee you.
Important figure in Iran, something guaranteed to set the stage for retaliation and bring the United States into an escalation trap with Iran. And that assassination was the result of pressure from Benjamin Netanyahu, who was working through the then CIA director, Mike Pompeo, to push Trump to retaliate for a series of skirmishes in Iraq with the Popular Mobilization Units and the Axis of Resistance, specifically around the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, and then killing Soleimani. And then when Trump came back into office, the relationship with the Adelsons was even more pronounced, more intense. And I think many people were so angry, including myself, were very angry at Biden and Blinken and the Democrats for supporting the Gaza genocide, which opened the door for the ultimate prize for the Israel lobby, which was the war on Iran. And the personnel that surrounded Trump coming back into office for his second term were even more pro-Israel than during the first term. There was no Steve Bannon or anything to offset the influence of these.
It was Charlie Kirk, though. Charlie Kirk had huge influence with Trump. Trump knew how deeply he was connected to the manga base, to young Americans. Charlie Kirk had the influence, killed this Iran war. And so he died.
Israel first Likudnik elements you had.
I shouldn't say that. And so I suspect that, there was some... the person that they caught that killed him, yes, I think that person did kill him. What I suspect is that he might have had some help in figuring things out.
Mike Waltz, who was initially supposed to be the national security chief, Mike Waltz is one of the Israel lobby's favorite pet projects on the Republican side. His entire career had been funded by the Israel lobby. You can look at someone like Mike Lawler in Congress as following in Mike Waltz's footsteps, and you can see the same kind of rhetoric there. They never stray from the Likudnik Netanyahu line. You had Rubio, of course, who Trump attacked in 2015 for being too close to Adelson. There's actually a Trump tweet slamming Rubio as a tool of Sheldon Adelson before Trump became that. Rubio also, as I mentioned before, major recipient of Paul Singer's money. Then you have Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, filling the shoes of Steve Bannon, who's now on the outside, slamming Trump for being too close to Israel. Susie Wiles worked on Benjamin Netanyahu's 2020 campaign. This was not known to the American public.
So many former Trump supporters are now turning on him and rightly so, because of his being captured by Israel, and he let himself be convinced in this politically suicidal war against Iran.
When Trump brought her in, it was just known that she was this super lobbyist.
And they don't want him to bring down the entire Republican Party with him.
Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, was actually Qatar's main lobbyist in the United States. She was getting over $100,000 a month from Qatar, but she is proven to be completely malleable and holds secret meetings with Miriam Adelson all the time, who tells her, we have to criminalize speech on behalf of Israel. Who am I missing? Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth, went to Israel on not a private tour, on a very public tour with a settlement organization, an organization that actually physically displaces Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem called Ateret Kohanim, as well as Arutz Sheva, which is the main pro-settler TV.
Honestly, fuck Jewish settlers. Israel itself and Israelis that aren't settlers and aren't in Netanyahu's circle, don't have anything specifically against, but fuck settlers.
Online network, and gave a speech endorsing the concept of the Third Temple, which means the destruction of the Al-Aqsa compound. Pete Hegseth took the most extreme line possible in order to advance through the ranks, the extreme line possible on Israel. I'm probably missing someone, but you can clearly see, just to wrap up, my survey of Trump's personnel and his funders, you can see how this played out in the situation.
I think there's going to be an uprooting of everyone that's seen with too much influence from Israel in the future at some point in the United States. And anyone who's been pandering to them, like people in this video, that'll become a huge negative. Basically, a break with Israel is inevitable at some point, given how much public sentiment it has turned.
evacuation room when Trump decided to go to war on Iran. I'm not talking about the February 11th meeting that you mentioned, Glenn, in your question, but just because this is something we can see. Anyone watching this can look up the photos of the Situation Room and how it was divided. Donald Trump was in Mar-a-Lago when he went to war on Iran, and he was surrounded by Susie Wiles, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and I think there was one other figure who I might be forgetting. And that was the pro-Israel A-team, all the people who had been basically installed by Israel. And then Team B was actually at the White House without Trump, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, and one other, those who were more likely to dissent from attacking Iran, who had no influence whatsoever on the policy. And these were figures, John Ratcliffe, that's the other one who was on A-team. John Ratcliffe is another figure who was in Congress, who was supported by AIPAC throughout his entire career, who was identified in leaked audio that I obtained from a private off-the-record AIPAC session.
And these people started a war that fucks America over.
Back in 2024, identified as one of the helpers for AIPAC on the inside of Donald Trump's national security team by AIPAC's CEO, Elliot Brand. So Ratcliffe was there. And then you have the secret February 11th meeting, Glenn, that you mentioned that the New York Times revealed. We all knew something like this was taking place because Netanyahu was in town at that time. Highways were being shut down. He was given presidential level security. And then he storms into a Situation Room meeting, which is highly unusual for any foreign leader. And he sits at the head of the table while Trump sits to the side. And he dictates to Trump and begins fear-mongering and tells Trump Iran will have a nuclear weapon within a week. It has a delivery mechanism to
something he's been saying for 40 years.
Attack Europe. It will soon be able to attack the United States. You must strike Iran now. And behind him on a live stream telecast is the Mossad director, David Barnea, who had been constantly briefing John Ratcliffe. And Trump fell into line. He knew what to do. And all of his team, though, the A-team that had been cultivated by Israel, also including CENTCOM chief Dan Kane from the Pentagon brass, who was never a fan of this war, they all started murmuring to themselves, this war is insane. What Netanyahu is saying is bogus. Like even Ratcliffe said, this is ridiculous. Marco Rubio called it BS. But what did none of them dare to do? Tell Trump how they felt. They're all a bunch of yes men. And they knew that if they expressed real reservations about this war and got in the way, well, they could be in serious trouble. They may not continue to rise through the ranks. Marco Rubio wants to run for president. So
yeah, forget that now.
They just got out of the way and let it happen. But that's what the New York Times isn't telling you is what I've just been explaining for the last 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know how long I've been going for, which is that
anyone who supported this Iran war openly at beginning and after it, that's going to hurt them. That finishes their political career.
That meeting was the product of years and years and years of cultivation, manipulation, grooming, threats, rewards, carrots, and sticks from Israel and its cutouts in the United States for the very figures that surround Trump, and grooming of Donald Trump himself by this foreign apartheid entity. It was essentially a coup, and this war is the result of a coup.
Yeah, I spoke to Joe Kent, and he was making the point that
I think it would add to that, tricking Trump into thinking Iran was trying to assassinate him, and played, I think, a big role in that too.
It was, not like regular lobbying. That it was quite intrusive. That you would have, Israeli citizens there in the rooms when they're talking about highly sensitive issues, and the way they just kind of blend in with the Americans. That it was quite extraordinary. You never have foreign leaders, intervening to this amount, to this extent. And I find it interesting how you refer to the Russiagate essentially, because this I know you coined the term Israelgate. I mean, this is the real influence, isn't it? How they influenced the election. I mean, but of course, while Russiagate was bogus, this appears to have some actual real evidence behind it. And it's interesting also how you argue this explains a lot how the first Trump administration was very different from the second in terms of his appetite for war. But how do you see then the Israel's role now in the ceasefire? Because I found it a bit, let's say, suspicious that the most violent attack on Lebanon had to happen on the first day of the ceasefire.
Yeah.
No, it's not suspicious. It's intentional.
Yeah, and when I mentioned Israelgate first, when I first said this is Israelgate, it was because I think one of the opening shots of Russiagate was that the NSA had taped a call between Sergei Kislyak and I think it was Jared Kushner. No, it was Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn and Sergei Kislyak. You remember that? So Michael Flynn was supposed to be the National Security Council chief for Donald Trump, which would have been, I mean, if you look at Michael Flynn's activity now, it's kind of wild to consider that. And the national security establishment in the U.S. wanted to get Flynn out. So someone in the NSA leaked the contents of this call, and they said, "Oh, Flynn was stupid. He was overseas, so it was easy for him to be spied on. He has a back channel, a secret back channel with the Russian ambassador. They're colluding." But what were they actually talking about? This is what was never told to the American public. Jared Kushner, who is one of the key Israeli moles in Trump's inner circle, who's married to Trump's daughter, Ivanka, as we all know, and is the son of Charles Kushner, Jared Kushner had been asked or instructed by Netanyahu to pressure Trump to veto a U.S. resolution. He wanted the U.S. to veto a UN resolution condemning Israel for settlement activity when they came in, and Obama actually abstained on that. So it was all about Israel. The call between the Russian ambassador and Michael Flynn was being held on behalf of Netanyahu in order to protect Israel's annexation of the West Bank. And the U.S. public was never told that. So the real scandal was Israelgate. And by the way, the Russian ambassador refused to do that. And then if you look at actually a lot of the billionaires that are said to be Russian billionaires, who are involved with Trump in some business capacity or another, so many of them are dual Russian-Israeli citizens. Haaretz, the Israeli liberal paper, actually did an expose about this. So in many ways, Russiagate was Israelgate. But to your question, Israel will not allow Donald Trump to end this war. And Israel decided that Donald Trump would begin this war. Marco Rubio, after his first briefing...
Well, I think they definitely successfully tricked him into this war. And they tricked him into this war by gaining an outside influence on those around him. No one could warn him about how crazy this was. And conveniently, Charlie Kirk died, so he couldn't oppose it.
With the Senate Gang of Eight, the main sort of power brokers in the Senate, bipartisan power brokers, told them that...
Yeah, but if Trump was truly completely 100% captured by Israel, then it wouldn't have mattered if Charlie Kirk lived or died. But I think Charlie Kirk, he would have prevented this war if he'd lived.
Israel was going to attack Iran whether we liked it or not, and so we had to follow them in there. And he came out to the press and made this very revealing disclosure, which should have been...
Same people who knew Russiagate narrative was bullshit are falling right for the clearly Tucker, Alex Jones, and Candace are just grifting and nonsensical. Well, not all of them, because I was one of the person from the very beginning who was, this Russiagate is nonsense. From the day I heard about Russiagate. But yes, a lot of the others may have been falling for that.
And a much larger scandal, but U.S. media consistently covers up the scandal of Israeli control. It still was enough to upset a lot of people, including Tony Blinken, who was the former Secretary of State, someone who's very close to Israel himself, and who's, the man who raised him. His stepfather was effectively an Israel lobbyist in France. His grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. And Blinken said, Blinken was on the national security team under Obama.
And it's funny that all these Israeli people pushing Trump for this war, that's ultimately going to be an absolute disaster for Israel. Because they pushed America into a war where the United States loses to Israel. And that has bad implications for Israel in a huge number of ways, and in the process, they're turning a huge part of the U.S. population against Israel.
And he said the Israelis tried the same exact thing. They said, we are going to attack Iran. You must follow us. And we actually said, no, and you are not going to do that because we still have the power to stop you. Trump didn't have the power to stop them, apparently. So Rubio effectively admitted that this war was launched for Israel. And now we can clearly see that the ceasefire was a hoax, and it is being...
Yeah, Tucker will get some big apologies going forwards, but it'll take a while. Truth has to come out, and then after that, there has to be about processing time where people admit the truth to themselves, and it's not going to happen right away.
Sabotaged by Israel. And again, we have very clear evidence. It's all happening in broad daylight. I believe it was the State Department, delivered a draft of a statement to the Pakistani Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, which he was to post on his Twitter X account, articulating the terms of agreement for negotiations.
The tinfoil hat, where does that come from? I've heard it so many times. I think it has to do with aliens, right? So, yeah, it's part of the whole, anyone who doesn't believe in the magic bullet that killed Kennedy is a tinfoil hat wearing alien believer. The way they discredit anyone who doesn't believe the official story.
In Islamabad, between the U.S. and Iran. And those terms clearly stated, I mean, the way that he posted this draft, he posted it without taking out the header that said to be posted by Shehbaz Sharif. And then he edited it. And so he revealed that the U.S. had provided it to him. The terms clearly stated that the...
Even now, when I look at my YouTube feed, there's alien stuff in it. Tim Pool was covering some stuff talking about aliens I recommended for me earlier today. It's crazy.
The ceasefire would involve Lebanon. that Lebanon was involved in this process. And that meant that the war on Lebanon that Israel had launched, including the ground invasion, would be paused at least. So what does Israel do? The biggest massacre that we can remember since the 1990s in Lebanon, over 250 killed, attacking areas of Beirut that are, I would call them like anti-Hezbollah strongholds, like Ain Raisi, and the area around the American University of Beirut, bombing the Corniche. And these are like wealthier, Sunni-heavy areas. They attacked all over Lebanon, just slaughtering the civilian population. Today, attacking the government center in Nabatea. And that's their way. That was their way of first trying to
We looked at the images of this the other day.
provoke Iran into attacking Israel. Netanyahu using his own population again as pawns and human shields in order to blow up the ceasefire. Iran hasn't fallen for the provocation, but also to test the U.S. and ensure that the United States is put on the spot to declare that they do not see Lebanon as part of the ceasefire deal. And of course, they fell right into line. J.D. Vance caught on the tarmac in, I guess it was Budapest. He was put out.
Part of that is that it's not just Israel having control. It'd be humiliating for Trump to turn on Israel, to be seen as him backing down if he, as a concession. It'd be like Iran managed to. Everyone knows that Trump is working hand in hand with Netanyahu. If suddenly Trump is pressuring Netanyahu to end the Lebanon war, that's proof that Iran is successfully made Trump surrender. It'd be humiliating in a way for Trump to break with Netanyahu.
Out there to like kind of keep him away from the whole process. And he said, well, I think all of these terms that everyone's talking about of agreement on the ceasefire are actually AI. He actually said that. Lebanon is never included. J.D. Vance just lied. So once again, Israel is determining what the U.S. can and can't do with this war. And it demonstrates the coup that has been undertaken in the White House, where effectively Donald Trump is the first Israeli president. Not that other presidents haven't been doing Israel's bidding, but when I say Donald Trump is the first Israeli president, he talks like an Israeli leader when he calls for bombing Lebanon, bombing Iran back to the Stone Age. That's what Israeli leadership has said about Gaza and Lebanon for decades. You can just Google Israeli, Stone Age, Lebanon, and many statements will come up. Remember, there was the Israeli defense minister calling the population of Gaza human animals. What did Trump say in front of the White House on Easter?
That's why Netanyahu funds Hamas, is so that he can point to them and say, oh, all Palestinians are animals. That's why you have Mossad Had going to Qatar begging them to keep funding Hamas, is so that he can use them as an example to tar all Palestinians as subhuman.
He can threaten them. He can threaten to bomb them back to the Stone Age because they're animals. And then he threatens the death of a civilization. It's Israeli language. What is Donald Trump's strategy in Iran? He has no strategy. He's letting Israel determine the strategy.
I don't think that anything like that is going to happen, that some breakthrough on 9/11. Trump is completely consumed by this Iran war right now. If he suddenly breaks some news about 9/11, it doesn't help the Strait of Hormuz become open. So I don't think that, we're going to see anything on that, or possibly Epstein either, while this huge crisis, his entire attention is focused on the Strait of Hormuz. That's why we had this stunt earlier today where a U.S. Navy destroyer went through the straits and then went back like this during the ceasefire. Was warned by Iran, and they went to the last possible second before being shot at and then retreated, just to try to show that Strait of Hormuz is open. When he's pulling stuff like that, he's not focused on anything but Iran.
Strategy. What are his objectives? Well, his main objective now is to open the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before the war. But beyond that, the strategy is regime change, because that's the Israeli strategy, and state destruction. So effectively, Donald Trump is inhabiting the role of an Israeli leader, and when the Israeli leader comes to Washington, he sits at the head of the table in the Situation Room.
Well, I thought it was also shocking that once Israel began to bomb in this manner, and they claimed, well, Lebanon was not a part of it. I thought this was really the moment for Trump, that he could push the Israelis aside of it, because this war has been an unmitigated disaster for the United States. I thought when the key national security interests are at stake, this is when the breaking point will come, when he'll push the Israeli aside. But again,
thing is, he can't. It'd be seen as a loss if he did something. If Israel ends up worse off because of this, it will be seen as a victory for Iran and a loss for him. That's part of the problem.
Instead, they said, well, Lebanon...
He needs a victory over Iran to get out of this politically. A victory in Iran means Israel in better position. Iran agreeing to give up its nuclear material and opening Strait of Hormuz. That's what he needs politically to survive. his interests are aligned in that way with Israel. For him to turn on Israel, it would be him also already accepting that he's finished politically, and that it might be what's best for the United States, but for him politically, it's over if he turns on Israel.
Also part of it, so canceling essentially the ceasefire, which the U.S. needed so badly. But do you see any of this having any impact in terms of fracturing the relationship though between the U.S. and Israel? Because the kind of the Tucker Carlson, if you will, and I guess Joe Kent's, I've never seen this.
Saying not turning on Israel looks bad for him. Well, he has portrayed himself as having won some huge victory over Iran. We've crushed them politically. We've destroyed their navy, destroyed their defense, etc., etc. That is the image he is portraying, and that is what he needs to sell in order for people to, when the summer gas prices go up to $5, $6, and they're like, why this? He needs to say, I had this huge victory. Well, if Trump attacked Iran on Israel's behalf, and then Israel ends up fucked because of it, and then why the fuck did we attack Iran and wreck the global economy? I mean, not only then is he a puppet of Israel, he's a useless puppet of Israel that failed his job. Isn't that worse than just being a puppet of Israel that's successful? Being a failed puppet that's completely incompetent, that's even worse than being a puppet.
Before, this is quite new.
Yeah. I mean, what Joe Kent did was astounding and obviously extremely brave. He's the highest ranking U.S. official to resign from any government over a war since Vietnam. And that says something about where MAGA is, where Donald Trump's base is.
The majority doesn't even know that we attacked because of Israel. They said they would without us. Yes, but if he does back down, Israel will turn on him too, and they'll say, "Oh, we got him to do this war, and then he fucked us over." They'd hurt him politically. They have stuff to hurt him politically with regard to. They'd admit that they convinced him to go into this war, and then he left them dry.
And where the American public is. First of all, Benjamin Netanyahu has destroyed one presidency after another, or attempted to destroy those presidencies. He destroyed Joe Biden with the Gaza genocide because Biden could not extricate himself from his bear hug of Netanyahu. He couldn't stop thinking, I am a Zionist, I must do what Israel wants. And he didn't understand the Democratic Party base.
I will agree that, oh my God, did that hurt Biden, what was going on in Gaza. The people like Hassan, they completely turned on him.
Sick of seeing children being slaughtered day after day after day. And then Kamala Harris, who is also very much a creation of the Israel lobby, and also, relied heavily on Silicon Valley money. She couldn't pull away either. So
yeah, she would have done this Iran war too if she'd been elected. So don't think Democrats would have been better, or it was a mistake to vote for Trump because of this Iran war. This Iran war would have happened with Kamala Harris too. So choice between the flavor of Iran war, basically.
Walked away from the Democrats. And now the same dynamic is happening with Donald Trump in actually more extraordinary fashion. So one of two things happens. Either one of these parties, the Democrats or Republicans, gain executive power and completely reorient the Israel-U.S. relationship so it is not this unshakable bond, and that Israel feels real pressure and is sanctioned for its behavior, or their presidency will be destroyed because they will face mass revolt from their base and from the key sort of faces and voices of their influencer class, which is in open revolt within Donald Trump's base. Donald Trump has now taken the, I would say, unprecedented step of personally attacking three.
That was insane.
Of the key influencers.
It was
some
four.
of his most loyal supporters: Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Alex Jones. There may be one other. Alex Jones took a lot of hits for January 6th, while Donald Trump kind of walked away. Candace Owens was very influential in creating TPUSA and also, being the face of.
Megyn Kelly was the fourth one, sorry.
Black Republicans turning away from the Democratic Party. Tucker Carlson was one of the most loyal figures and the most popular American broadcaster. His show on Fox was one of the only cable news shows anyone watched, and he was constantly defending Trump and shaping the America First agenda. And he's attacked them all to the point where he has said that Brigitte Macron, the former high school teacher of Emmanuel Macron, is more attractive than Candace Owens. I mean, he went that low. The statement was a product of pressure.
Trump, yeah, I think it's the pressure, the stress. He's finished because of this Iran war, and he's lashing out.
From Laura Loomer, the fanatical anti-Muslim Israel First influencer who has really very little popularity herself, but has managed to get more private time with Donald Trump than Trump's own wife, Melania Trump. And she basically...
like others, like Nick Fuentes, are also heavily criticizing Trump, but he was never, I don't think he's never met Nick Fuentes, and he didn't attack him.
Basically took credit for this, saying she played a series of clips of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones denouncing Trump to get this statement. And now others are joining the fray. Benny Johnson.
Oh, the tweet Trump put out? Yes, I did beginning of the stream yesterday. It was insane. Insults. He just throwing around low IQ people.
This is highly significant. Benny Johnson was basically the most corporatized, choreographed, scripted MAGA bot. And he has, if Benny Johnson did anything, it was always to, follow instructions from the top to support Donald Trump through some talking points that were handed to him. And he was also very close to Charlie Kirk's TPUSA. He is now denouncing Netanyahu, stating that Netanyahu should not be allowed in the White House. This is hugely significant. It suggests there's going to be an even greater mutiny. Donald Trump's approval rating is in the toilet for a president at this point in his second term. Israel's approval rating among Democrats is 20%. Okay, 80% of Democrats see Israel in a negative light. The number's obviously much lower for Republicans. You have that class of Fox News baby boomers who, are racist towards Muslims. They're just addicted to bombing brown people. They don't know right.
This is a site called The Donald, that's a message board that's full of manga people and pro-Trump people. And you can see some of the conversations going on here to get the sense of how Trump's base is taking it. And they're still overall supportive, but they're slowly starting to turn. Why didn't he go after them in his first term? If they are such a threat, why did he wait 8 days and lose power before attacking them? Yeah, it's...
right from wrong. So they look at Trump as a kind of moral locus, a moral guide. But even the numbers among Republicans are collapsing. Republicans under 40 do not support Israel anymore. So the writing's on the wall, and Donald Trump is preparing to escalate this war with Iran, in which he has already lost. And the global economy is something Americans generally don't think about. But in a week or two, they are really going to start feeling the burn of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and it's going to get even worse for Donald Trump. So he's now like in the middle of this.
The last shipment of Iranian oil, of Gulf oil to the United States happens in 4 days.
Firing squad. And who supports Trump? I think this is one of the most important things for people to understand for the purpose of this conversation is who among the MAGA podcastistan commentariat supports Donald Trump. It is not fully appreciated and is not discussed, you're not allowed to discuss this in US mainstream media, that these figures are effectively unregistered Israeli foreign agents. I'll just read off some names. If you're not American and you're not in our media world, you might not recognize them all, but these are some of the most visible figures in the MAGA podcast world. Josh Hammer, Israel Firster, has very little popular appeal, but you just see him everywhere because he's astroturfed. Dennis Prager from PragerU, which is this major propaganda mechanism, which has been actually affecting educational curricula in Florida under the watch of the Israel First governor, Ron DeSantis, where they're actually propagandizing children in favor of Israel. Prager, I think, is a Jewish convert to evangelical Christianity. Larry Elder, one of the major Black Republican influencers, radio host. Hugh Hewitt, who is someone who was out there supporting the Iraq War, is like a very, very...
I recognize a lot of these names. I won't watch them regularly at all or ages.
Mainstream Republican AM radio voice. Dinesh D'Souza, Sebastian Gorka, who is on Trump's NSC.
I'm from Brazil. Everything is expensive here. Yeah, and I hate to say it, but the 35% of the world's fertilizers comes through the Gulf, and that's gone. And so next year, things are going to get even more. The food is not going to be good next year. It's going to go up a lot. But at least that's not for a while. One upside is that's something for 10 months from now or 9 months from now. The oil shock is the first big deal. And the last big deal will probably be the gas prices in Europe the next winter. Oh my God, is that going to be rough for them?
Team and has a radio show that's nationally broadcast. Brandon Tatum, Todd Starnes, and then Laura Trump. And
yes, it will. The war will end before next year. But the problem is, for example, fertilizer. That's the crops are being planted now in the spring, and when that fertilizer was needed, it wasn't shipped out. And you have crops go down in half without that fertilizer. So we still have 65% of the world's fertilizer. So we're going to still get some crops, but it will be a lot less than normal. I also believe the war will end before next year because all Iran has to do is keep the Strait of Hormuz closed for 6 months, and they've achieved their aim. They've inflicted a cost on Trump. or maybe not even 6 months, actually. It could be a little shorter than that. So yeah, after that, they'll be much more willing to negotiate, and the world will be much more desperate at that point. So between Iran becoming more and more satisfied with what it's done as time goes forwards, and the rest of the world becoming more and more desperate for some type of solution, at some point those two factors will converge and bring this war to an end. The only wild card is if Trump decides he's going down politically and he decides to take the rest of the world with him and decides to bomb the hell out of Iran. Iran retaliates, bomb the hell out of the rest of the region, and yeah, then we're all fucked with $200 oil. But I agree the war will end before next year.
And Don Jr. Okay, what do they all have in common? They all are broadcast through something called Salem Media. Salem Media is an Israeli foreign agent. It is listed in a Foreign Agent Registration Act form with the Department of Justice as the delivery mechanism for a major contract between Israel's foreign ministry and Clock Tower Strategies through a German firm called Havas to propagandize the American public. We're talking about $10 million of direct payments to podcasters and influencers, as well as hundreds of millions of dollars to cover the deliverables. And the Salem Media Group Chief Strategy Officer is a federally registered Israeli foreign agent named Brad Parscale, who heads Clock Tower Strategy.
Real question is, what does Trump do when he gets really, really desperate? And that's going to probably happen when these negotiations fall through, as the two sides' positions are too far apart at the moment for it to really go anywhere.
Laura Trump, who is Trump's daughter-in-law, and Donald Trump Jr., who is Donald Trump's daughter, now own a 30% stake in Salem Media. So they have effectively merged through this foreign agent business deal with the Israeli foreign ministry.
Here in Brazil, we have a really strong agrarian lobby, which doesn't let us industrialize because they want to sell crops to external markets because it gives more money. So if we industrialize, that would be a problem to them, and it would also people who buy food from us, especially U.S. and then all of Latin America. I didn't realize that. You industrialized. I mean, it is possible for a country to produce lots of food and be industrialized. Russia's a great example of that. It is a food exporter and it has a big industry. So it shouldn't be an obstacle. Is it because like stuff like water is a limited resource and industry would be using water, or what's the angle? How would industry hurt the agrarian lobby? Because there must be some rationale against industrialization because it hurts farming somehow. Is that a water issue? Is it a labor issue? Like it would take labor away from being available to work on farms?
The Trump family has merged with the Israeli foreign ministry. You have an Israeli foreign ministry official whose name is on the contract. And who is Brad Parscale, the main foreign agent who's registered here, who's presiding over this gargantuan contract. He is the former campaign manager for Donald Trump's 2020 campaign, who created Donald Trump's digital media strategy. However, in October of 2020, Parscale was arrested at his home, tackled by police because he was said to be beating his wife, was involved in...
Problem is, industrializing also takes a huge amount of investment, capital to build factories and whatever. And one area is that one problem that U.S. puppet states or influenced by the United States is that we just want their resources, and we won't want all their money invested in U.S. stock market, for example. We don't want them putting their money back into their own economies. We want them funding our deficit. It's and then the lack of investment results in no industrialization.
Was said to be abusing alcohol and had 10 high-powered firearms. So he got basically a Baker Act, was tackled on camera. You can go online and see this video. He's a huge guy. He was 6'6". And that meant that he could no longer work in the Trump campaign. So Israel moves in and says, we're going to give this guy the opportunity of a lifetime, and we will infiltrate Trump world through Brad Parscale and gain all of the data that he used to effectively move the American public to support Donald Trump. And then we're going to take over the whole world of influencers that operates, that's willing to basically be paid and be bought off. And there are other figures that I can't.
Oh yeah, there were stories breaking. I remember influencing, taking money to push pro-Israel stuff. Don't have to worry about that ever happening with me, because the big farmers know that. After that, we will do an agrarian reform, which will take their land away and to give it our people cheap food for the eternal market, and also the factor that many rural workers will actually go to the cities get more opportunities. So yeah, it might take their labor away. They'd have to pay workers more to work on the farms if they also had the opportunity to work on the factories. So yeah, so there's that angle. And it sounds like you have big landowners worried that their land might be redistributed. So there's a middle class that has more political power. Yeah, I can see that. It's sad. We call them latifundiarios. Well, that whole thing, that dynamic in countries where people are getting screwed over and to the benefit of the United States, whatever, it is in part propped up by the whole U.S. global media apparatus that pushes narratives that, I mean, the media there, the international media must somehow say it's good to not industrialize, right? Or I would imagine U.S. media, to the extent it is there, it is working with the forces that don't want to industrialize. I don't know. I'm just guessing here. You'd have to tell me if I'm right.
Prove they're part of this contract, but I see them reading off the talking points. Glenn Beck, this washed up fitness influencer, Jillian Michaels, who's been attacking us at the Gray Zone, and Joe Kent, and Laura Loomer herself. So basically, you have a war between MAGA voices, or America First, who are not paid by Israel and are just sick of being dominated by a foreign government. And many of them are also sick of seeing children be slaughtered and wars be started that are destroying our economy. And then almost everyone else seems to be a part of this foreign agent racket. And we're not allowed to talk about that in U.S. media because you'll be accused of being an anti-Semite. But it's one of the biggest scandals, along with this entire coup that has taken over the White House and taken us to.
You know, this gets to the same thing as like all media in the United States being owned by like 3 or 4 corporations now at this point. And yeah, that is how you have editorial boards that all take the same positions on stuff and don't cover certain topics. Yeah, if you look behind the scenes, yes, the infrastructure of control networks exist, including those of Israel.
War that I've seen in my lifetime.
It's incredible. I was going to ask if this real influence was ideological or institutional, but I think you answered that very thoroughly.
It's both.
So,
well, yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And just really quickly, I mean, I think the ideology can be institutionalized, but the people who are directing this campaign, who are ideologically zealous about this war, whether they're behind the curtain and they're operatives, they're like Israel lobbyists whose names we don't know, or they're more prominent figures like Josh Hammer or Mark Levin, who is the key voice of Netanyahu's coterie in the U.S. at Fox News, pushing Trump. They don't have a lot of popular appeal within MAGA. So they rely on institutionalizing their views by basically buying off the very transactional, easily corrupted class of people that rode on Donald Trump's power.
One thing that jumps to mind right now is a report, I think it was Tim Pool, that highlighted that Facebook had been successfully sued for being addictive. Now, why is that a problem? Well, the reason Facebook is addictive and YouTube algorithm is addictive is it serves you what you want to see. What videos it tries to serve you, the videos that interest you the most, given your interest. And that would be like if you're being skeptical about Israel, it'll feed you videos of people that are skeptical about Israel. And if they have to, the lawsuit might force places like Facebook to change their algorithm to promote establishment, like safe, like for example, astroturfed Israeli propagandists instead of someone like me on YouTube. That is the danger. It was one lawsuit, and I don't think it'll happen immediately, but there's definitely a push for that to try to go after the algorithm. Because that is what's a big part of why the truth is spreading out there, is a lot of people are able to find it easily because of the algorithm of these social media networks. Let me have a look at this. And the right wing over here is not even a bit nationalistic. The right actually wants to give everything to the U.S. for the Christian values and democracy from the United States. But they just want to have power. If we industrialize, the latifundarios will also have to compete against the new industrial class, and they will lose a lot of power. Yes. You have another big industry in your country. That industry will have lobbyists and will compete with you. And if you're the agriculture, and yes, and it's probably another big thing is that the land is you have big landowners. If you had a lot of small landowners, there wouldn't be this huge resistance to industrialization because it wouldn't be coordinated that well. And yeah, so and if we industrialize, I'll also compete with class, and they will lose a lot of power in government. They straight up want to cede shit to the U.S. to stay in power. All of Latin America, right, is like that. It's complete reversal. Yeah, I can see that. It's there is also the left's like tendency to nationalize stuff that the United States doesn't like. So that's why we try to use the right. It also dates back to Iran-Contra, when the United States, to fight communism, tried to go after left-wing governments around the world and put right-wing governments in. And because of that, it's not surprising that right-wing parties throughout Latin America are more closely tied to the United States as long-term effects of that campaign to install left-wing government, right-wing governments, the Americas.
Pirate ship into power. So, I mean, there's a blend of ideological zealotry and institutionalization. But, I highly doubt, if somebody came in from, I don't know, if like,
Yeah, United Fruit all over again. Yes, invading country because they wanted to nationalize a food company.
Abu Obaida from Hamas was allowed to come to the U.S. with like suitcases full of cash and give it to MAGA influencers. Some of them might be delivering the exact opposite message tomorrow. And
problem is, I will say, there is an argument against, a pretty good one actually, against nationalizing private companies. Because you do need, like, for a country to grow right, you do need foreign investment into that country to build, like, for example, oil infrastructure in Venezuela. And no one's going to come and invest in your country if you start nationalizing private industries because they're worried, well, my investment might go up in flames. The point is, how did this investment happen? Was it a fair investment? Were the people screwed when this investment was made? Are they paying proper taxes? How is it happened actually matters. If a company comes in legitimately, invests money, creates jobs, buys land, builds a factory, creates jobs, yeah, their factory shouldn't be taken from them. But they bribed people to get land and like stole the land and stuff like that. It's a different story. History matters in these cases, I think.
the reality is that MAGA itself is done. America First as a brand has moved beyond Trump and is looking for another vehicle because they don't believe in any of this stuff. And they're in the wilderness now, just as, those of us who came more from the left were.
And yes, there's also the monopoly aspect to that. If companies get monopolies, they abuse that and it can hurt the countries. So yeah, nationalizing some things like water should be, there's a good case for that to be something nationalized. Of course, they usually run less competency, but there's problems both sides.
Went out into the wilderness after Democratic president after president. I mean, not just Biden, but Obama, Clinton did Israel's bidding. And I think you're going to see a major clash when both Republican and Democratic conventions convene and both have to select you're not going to have an incumbent president. So there's going to be a major civil war in both parties over this issue. And I don't see how it can be avoided.
Thing is, the investments are just a way to control and get even more from the country. I am LGBTQ. I don't support ONGs to come over here and support LGBTQ because I think it will end up soft power bullshit. Yes, it's NGOs maybe. Yes, I think NGOs, that makes more sense. Yes. Yeah, it's unless. Yeah, that gets into NGOs are used for all kinds of mayhem, especially if they're foreign-funded ones. When you have color revolutions like in Ukraine and stuff like that, it's always NGOs come in and mobilize one group of society. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, what LGBT supporting NGOs, what would they be doing? Unless it depends on the country, really. But if it's a place that has outright made it like illegal to be gay or something, this might be a different story. But I think in a lot of countries, pretty much people can be gay if they want to. They're. I'm not an expert on the legal rights of LGBT community around the world, so I'm just guessing from. You don't hear people complaining that much about LGBT rights in Latin America, in the United States. So I'm guessing there isn't a huge problem. But that's as far as I know.
That there has to be a change in policy after all this. I think the clock is running out on Israel, and all it can do at this point is bomb its way out of problems.
Well, Max, thank you so much for taking the time. It's
Well, I think this will do it for my Iran section for today. This will be on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.